Hey, what is going on, guys? It's the SS Ultimate Goku back into the video. And today I want to do a top 10 video of my own personal opinion, but it's something that I think a lot of people talk about. It's a very subjective subject, but I am today going to be talking about and ranking the top 10 greatest wrestlers to never win the world championship. Now there is some rules and some criteria just so we don't get any discrepancies or misinformation on how we're going about this. So the rules that I've set up and the way and the criterias that I've set up for how I'm ranking this list and who is on this list is basically simply on my depiction. And again, everyone's going to have their own list. Everyone's going to have their own, opinions on what they count as who was a world champion or who wasn't. If you go back to the territory days, obviously almost anybody could have been a world champion at that point. If you go back to the height of the NWA, you could count that. Or if you just strictly count WWE, then there's a lot of people that can be never have been a world champion. So my criteria, which I'm going to have my rules right now listed. So the rules are: cannot have won the WWE Heavyweight Champion, which also can be called the WWWF Heavyweight Champion or the WWF Heavyweight Champion, which they were once called at one point. The World Heavyweight Championship in WWE, the WWE Universal Heavyweight Championship, the WCW/NWA World Heavyweight Championship, the WCW International World Heavyweight Championship, and the ECW Heavyweight Championship in ECW or in the WWE's ECW brand. I am only counting the NWA when it was a part of WCW/Jim Crockett Promotions. Anything after that of the NWA does not count on this list. This is done specifically because NWA, after they kind of departed from WCW, weren't very good. They kind of did their thing with ECW for a little bit, and that kind of didn't end well for them. And then, well, it just kind of went downhill for them. And it didn't really kind of get back up on its feet until most recently. So, yeah, that's why. NWA disbanded from WCW in 1993. As you know, Jim Crockett Promotions was WCW before it was WCW. Then Ted Turner bought it, and then they renamed it WCW. So, yes, we are acknowledging pre-existing stuff for WCW, but that's pretty much it. AEW is too new to count, so we're not counting them. And considering the fact that the two AEW World Heavyweight Champions are both former WWE Heavyweight Champions, that being Chris Jericho and Dean Ambrose, respectively, aka Jon Moxley, this pretty much is pretty valid to do at this point. But hopefully, down the line, we can acknowledge AEW, since AEW is a very cool organization right now. But right now, we can't because they're too new. And then most importantly, the last one, I'm not counting anything from TNA or anything else after that, like Ring of Honor or any of that other stuff, New Japan. Not counting any of that stuff. I do watch Ring of Honor from time to time, but I mean, they're kind of a lower echelon, type company, more of an indie company. that's just kind of more high up on the food chains. And then the same goes for New Japan. I don't really watch New Japan Pro Wrestling, so it's not something that I can really kind of comment on. TNA is kind of dead, but I was never really that much of a fan of TNA to begin with, so not going to really count that. Anyways, with that being said, let's go to the criteria. So the criteria we have for this is drawing power, wrestling skills, over in popularity as a face in terms of a good guy, or heel in terms for bad guy role, for anybody who doesn't know the face and heel term. Longevity, character development, and most importantly, mic skills. Excuse me. So, these are the criterias of which I have set up, and rules I have set up for this list. So with that, let's get this list started. So coming in at number 10, I have China. Yes. The ninth wonder of the world. I know some people will probably be surprised by this, but yes, I definitely feel like China deserves to be on this list. Now, people probably that weren't alive or too young to remember this, China was massively over, and she was one of the fewest females that was legitimately considered to actually win the WWE Championship at one point. She eventually did win the Intercontinental title a couple of times. So she did win the secondary title. I believe she was the first female to win a men's title, no less. Which is an accomplishment in itself, which is why she should be in the Hall of Fame as a single wrestler, not just in the DX group Hall of Fame, which is what they put her in. They put her in the Hall of Fame as part of the DX faction, which they had to because she was in that group. But she definitely should be in the Hall of Fame, WWE Hall of Fame, as a female wrestler. China legitimately had a shot. As a matter of fact, she was actually number one contender at one point at SummerSlam 1999 to verse Stone Cold Steve Austin for the WWE Championship, but that was eventually scrapped, opting to do a triple threat match with Mankind and Triple H, which Mankind would win, surprisingly, pinning Austin, and then, of course, the next night Triple H would win the belt. This was originally planned for China to have won it, and then Triple H was supposed to take it from her shortly after, but that, of course, didn't happen. Had this happened, China would have been the only person to that would have been a female to ever win a world heavyweight championship in wrestling history, and probably no one would have ever duplicated it. And definitely would have been a big moment for women, for sure. But unfortunately, it just didn't happen. But still, nonetheless, China definitely deserves a place to be in this list. Coming in at number 9 is Wade Barrett. Oh, yes, Wade, unfortunately, got shafted by WWE. What can we say about this? So Wade Barrett came to the main roster after winning NXT Season 1 when it became a brand game contest thing. It's basically not the same NXT that it is today. But he won that after ECW's cancellation. He won this NXT Season 1. And following that, he became one of the most hottest wrestlers in the company for his main roster debut because he debuted as the leader of the Nexus. You're either Nexus or you're against us. And that faction was massively over. It was basically, the concept was, it was a faction of rookies. that just basically ran roughshod out of the entire WWE roster. Wade Barrett was massively over because he was the leader. He was the winner of season 1, so that's why he got to be the leader. And so they basically, at SummerSlam, did a traditional Survivor Series team battle, which was weird in itself, since that was Survivor Series thing, not SummerSlam's thing. But nonetheless, they did this, and instead of having Team Nexus win, they had Team WWE win. Still was a dumb thing at the time, and at the time, I actually called that Team WWE was going to win because I just knew what WWE was going to plan. They were just going to have this whole thing with John Cena win, which is exactly what they did, and John Cena won, and Nexus was never the same after that loss. Chris Jericho and Edge have gone on record years later in shoot interviews talking about the incident and saying how Team Nexus should have won this, and they were pushing for Team Nexus to win, but John Cena would not give in, and Cena pulled his, basic, pull with the company and basically wanted to win. Shortly after this, Nexus had a chance to recover, if that even makes sense, for the Survivor Series. A couple months later, Nexus now had control of John Cena. Cena was basically forced to do whatever Wade Barrett wanted him to do, or he'd be fired. So Cena was forced to be the special guest referee for Survivor Series between Wade Barrett and Randy Orton. And unfortunately, instead of giving in and having, Wade Barrett win, John Cena decided to count 3 to the mat for Randy Orton, and Randy Orton retained the WWE Championship, and unfortunately, it was never the same after that for Wade Barrett. Wade Barrett would eventually win a couple of Intercontinental Championship title runs, but it was just never the same. Wade Barrett did have a chance to possibly win Money in the Bank, but of course that nod went to Daniel Bryan, which ended up being a good thing, too, for Daniel Bryan, because that's what ultimately started the Yes Movement once he cashed in and won the world title for the first time. But because Wade Barrett didn't win that title, there was just never really the same. And just kind of was floating around in the mid-cards. He got injured a couple of times, and he just never could recover from that SummerSlam loss as well as the Survivor Series loss that he had prior to SummerSlam. They just never got it. Nexus ultimately was taken over by CM Punk, and then was basically just disbanded altogether once CM Punk got his massive push once his contract was up. But it just didn't help Wade Barrett, and so because of this, Wade Barrett is on this list. Could possibly come back in the future, but I doubt it. But there's always a possibility. But as of right now, he is number 9 on our list of guys that never won a pro wrestling world heavyweight title. Alrighty, coming in at number 8, Jesse the Body Ventura. Most of you will probably know him as the governor of Minnesota, and or for people that are in Minnesota at least. And also, most of you probably know him as the WWF/WCW commentator. However, Jesse Ventura was a wrestler before he was a colored commentator, and was a very good one. He was in the AWA, and he was in the WWF until he unfortunately got blood clogs, and this was reportedly before he was going to have a world title feud with Hulk Hogan, who was the champion at this point. Unfortunately, because of this, Jesse Ventura's wrestling career took a detour for a while, and ultimately he slowly started to get into the color commentating business of wrestling and would ultimately retire and just pursue being a commentator for pretty much the rest of his wrestling career, and not actually wrestling. Jesse Ventura did win a few tag team titles in the AWA, but never really won any major titles in the WWF, unfortunately, as well as never winning the world title, which is why he's on this list. Reasons why he couldn't win the world title, well, back in the 80s, this was during the territory days, where typically, if you weren't the world champion, you probably weren't ever going to win it, because the world champion pretty much would hold the title 3 to 5 years or longer during the territory days. So that's pretty much why. And also, a lot of territories preferred having baby faces having the lengthy title runs over heels. With the exception, I guess, with the exception of maybe the NWA, which were the big players back then. But WWF especially followed the babyface dominating champion back then, and usually in those days, the babyface had the title for 3 to 5 years or longer, and that just probably wasn't going to ever fit for Jesse Ventura to win the WWE Championship. But great wrestler, great mic guy, which is why he was a color commentator, and a great heel, great bad guy character. He is the only wrestler to this day, as he has put it, that has a wrestling retirement, because he won a lawsuit against Vince McMahon to get tape royalties. So there's that. He also went on to become governor of Minnesota, as I mentioned earlier, and hoping he'll run for president one day. But nonetheless, Jesse Ventura, great wrestler, and definitely deserves to be on this list. And yeah, Jesse, please run for president. Anyways, he is number 8 on our list. So yeah. Alright, coming in at number 7, Curt Hennings, aka better known as Mr. Perfect, absolutely perfect. Perfection in itself. So, Mr. Perfect, he never did win the world title. He did win the Intercontinental title. Unfortunately, Mr. Perfect had a couple of things that unfortunately happened to him. He got injured. He was out for a couple of years. He actually put over Bret Hart at 1991 SummerSlam, losing the Intercontinental title to Bret, but retired immediately after that match. And that match is a classic match, and it is still talked about to this day. And he was wrestling that match injured, and retired right after that match ended. That just tells you the testament of Mr. Perfect. He did eventually come back, had some other good matches, went to WCW for a while, had some success there, didn't really get that much, though, in WCW. Technically speaking, Curt Hennings did actually win a world championship, but that was in the AWA, which that was during the dying years of AWA, and as my rules specify, we are not counting AWA, so we do not acknowledge that. But nonetheless, Curt Hennings was a great wrestler and definitely deserved to win the WWE or WCW title. Unfortunately, the injuries just unfortunately never let him get a chance to get it. That's really the only thing I could really, possibly can get behind to why he never won it. Just bad timing, unfortunately. Not to mention there were a bunch of other guys that were coming up, in the company at that point during the end parts of the Hogan era. and then the beginning of the new generation era. He was kind of in the mixture of that in WWE, and unfortunately, it just didn't click for him to get it. But nonetheless, definitely deserved to win a WWE or WCW world title. He did come back to WWE in 2002, but really didn't do that much, and eventually got fired, and then a year later he unfortunately passed away. But nonetheless, definitely deserved to be a world champion in, what we're counting for rules. So yeah, absolutely perfect. All right, coming in at number 6 is Hot Rod, Rowdy Piper. Yes, it's really unfortunate that Roddy Piper never won the world title. He actually had been with the WWE since before WrestleMania 1. Okay, so he was with the WWE from WrestleMania 1 until like the mid 90s when he eventually jumped to WCW. But during that run, not only did he never win a world title, he never won any other title. He finally won a world title, or not world title, he finally won the Intercontinental title in 1992 when he beat the Mountie at the Royal Rumble, who had just taken the belt from Bret Hart 2 or 3 days before. In the storyline, Bret Hart had a fever, but in reality, there was a possibility he might jump to WCW, which would have been weird since he was an upper mid-card at this point. But nonetheless, this is why they did this. So the Mountie won it. Bret was unable to invoke his rematch because he had a fever. So the Mountie did an open challenge at the Royal Rumble pay-per-view, which Piper accepted and won the Intercontinental title. He then eventually would lose it back to Bret 2 months later at WrestleMania 8. But other than that, that's all he ever won in WWE. He would eventually go to WCW and have a couple other mid-card title success, but as well as also beating Hulk Hogan at the Starrcade of 1996, which was essentially the WrestleMania of WCW. However, his match against Hulk Hogan, which Hulk Hogan was the world champion at this point for WCW, unfortunately, it was a non-title match. It was not actually for the title, even though it was Starrcade, which is supposed to be WCW's WrestleMania. Because of this, Roddy Piper never won the world title, and that was the closest chance he had of winning it. But thanks to, I guess, Hulk Hogan saying, well, it's going to be a non-title match because he had creative control of his contract, Piper, unfortunately, was robbed of winning a world title, and any other title for that matter. It's really weird looking at Roddy Piper because he was one of the main key players during the Hulkamania era of WWE, but he never really got any titles, not only world titles, but any titles up to that point. And he didn't win the Intercontinental title until towards the end of his WWE career, and it was under weird circumstances, and then just lost it 2 months later. It was just kind of a weird thing for Piper because he was one of the more over bad guys in the WWE. So yeah, Hot Rod, unfortunately, I guess just kind of got overlooked, even though he was doing pretty much everything to get the most heat out of everyone. I mean, he hit Superfly Jimmy Snuka with a coconut on Piper's Pit, started the precedent for having wrestlers have their own talk show on television. with Piper's Pit, and just seemed like there was just no place for him. And then, of course, in WCW, he got robbed because of Hogan's creative control and having their Starrcade 96 match a non-title match, even though Hogan was the world champion and lost cleanly at Starrcade, which was WrestleMania of WCW. Yeah. Just, once again, just weird booking for someone that was massively over as Piper. Coming in at number 5, the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. But wait! Didn't he win the WWE title? Well, not exactly. See, Ted DiBiase did not win the WWE title. He bought the WWE title, but unfortunately, President at the time, Jack Tunney, declared that that was illegal to do. And because of this, he did not win it. And because of this illegal transaction, Andre the Giant, who did win the WWE title that night at Saturday night's main event, because of this, Andre the Giant is not allowed on this list, even though Andre the Giant only won the WWE World Heavyweight title for 30 seconds before giving the title up to Ted DiBiase for millions of dollars in storyline. However, in reality, behind the scenes, unfortunately, the biggest reason to why the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, never won the WWE Heavyweight Championship was due to the simple fact that, well, probably would not happen today, but one of the most trivial reasons is that the Honky Tonk Man, who everyone knows as the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time, / the, to this day, longest reigning Intercontinental Champion of all time, decided not to play ball and not put Randy Savage over for the Intercontinental title, and at Saturday night's main event that very same night, opting for Savage to win the match by disqualification. And by him winning the match by disqualification, that means Savage wins the match but does not win the title under championship rules. Because of this, a swerve happened. So backstage, because the because Honky Tonk Man decided, well, I'm not going to lose the Intercontinental title, Vince McMahon then basically told Randy Savage that because Honky Tonk Man did this, that now you're going to win the WWE Heavyweight Championship. Yes, this actually happened, and everyone has done shoot interviews has said this is what happened. Hard to believe that refusing to do one thing leads to another person's fortune, but that's exactly what happened here. My favorite wrestler of all time, Randy Macho Man Savage, won the WWE Championship a month later at WrestleMania 4 when the title was vacated following this whole Andre the Giant selling the title to Ted DiBiase after he won the title from Hulk Hogan at Saturday night's main event. They vacated the title because President Jack Tunney deemed it, as I noted earlier, was illegal to do. And so they did a tournament, which led to Ted DiBiase and Randy Macho Man Savage in the finals and in the main event of WrestleMania 4. The winner of the match would win the WWE Championship and would be the champion. And Randy Macho Man Savage won it and got to be the champion for an entire year. Which was great because, you know, he was my favorite wrestler of all time. So, but because of this, this transaction happening, Ted DiBiase never got to win the WWE title after this. And because of this, this is what led to the $1 Million Championship. So Ted DiBiase, instead of getting to win the WWE World title, he got to create his own custom $1 million championship belt that you see here. This is why it was done. So Ted DiBiase went on to have a $1 million championship belt. Eventually would lose it to Virgil, his bodyguard, who basically turned face and turned on the $1 Million Man. He would take it from Ted DiBiase, have it for a couple months before losing it back to Ted DiBiase. And then after that, the $1 Million Championship belt mysteriously disappeared, and Ted DiBiase would form a tag team. Money Incorporated would win the tag team titles, and that would pretty much be it. Another unfortunate case, he would get injured and would be forced into early retirement. He would eventually leave the WWE to go to WCW, but when he went to WCW, he was basically just going as a manager type character, not a wrestler. So, unfortunately, that was kind of it. Unfortunately, Ted DiBiase's big opportunity to ever win the world title was basically not given to him because one person decided not to lose the Intercontinental title to Randy Savage, which led to Randy Savage then, instead of getting the Intercontinental title, got the world title. Instead. So, Randy Savage benefited the most from this, in my opinion. I mean, but obviously that's great because that's probably why I'm a fan of Randy Savage today, because I don't know if I would have been had that not happened. Because who knows what would have happened if Savage never won the title. So, yeah, this was a good thing, in my opinion. Ooh, yeah, dig it. But nonetheless, for people that are fans of Ted DiBiase, unfortunately, this is not good for them. It's kind of really interesting to think about it, since the plan was for him to actually win the title at WrestleMania 4, which is weird, since during this time period, babyfaces were the people that always went over in the main event of WrestleMania. During the early years of WrestleMania. So this was actually probably really a surprise. But nonetheless, this was actually supposed to happen, apparently, from Honky Tonk Man, Ted DiBiase. Everyone's talked about this, so and have said that and they've all pretty much have kept this story, that this is how it was supposed to happen. So yeah, that's why he's on this list as never being a world champion. Coming in at number 4 is none other than the world's most dangerous man, Ken Shamrock. Ken Shamrock was phenomenal in the short time he was with WWE, and he was a groundbreaking wrestler for the short time he was there. Now, I'm trying to separate the stuff from his UFC career, because obviously he was doing the UFC stuff before he got into the WWE. And as a matter of fact, the reason why he joined the WWE was because UFC couldn't really pay him top tier money anymore, because they were getting kind of hit by the government during this period. So he decided to work for Vince and do professional wrestling, which he had started doing some professional wrestling years prior to him doing UFC and legitimate fighting, but never really, went to it, because he decided to really pursue real fighting rather than doing scripted wrestling. But nonetheless, Ken Shamrock eventually did come to the WWE. Ken Shamrock was labeled, prior to him joining the WWE, by ABC the world's most dangerous man for his accomplishments in the UFC. So he was already coming in with a built title that WWE started advertising for him. But this was not a title that WWE just gave to him. This was legitimately something that he was given by an ABC documentary, being dubbed the world's most dangerous man. Ken Shamrock being dubbed that is something very, very, very good, coming into world of Attitude Era, which is what WWE was going into at this point. Ken Shamrock's debut was in 1997 at WrestleMania 13 as a referee between the Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin match, but he would quickly become an active wrestler in there and would be the one who started the tap out thing in submission holds. When you see a wrestler doing tap outs, that was contributed to Ken Shamrock. Prior to Ken Shamrock's arrival, pretty much when you were put into a submission hold, you just said give up or you nodded your head to the referee. Ken Shamrock was the one who started doing the tap out thing with where you put your hand on the mat and start tapping out with the ankle lock. Yes, Ken Shamrock made the ankle lock famous in WWE, not Kurt Angle. Ankle lock was called the ankle lock because that's legitimately what it was called in UFC, which is why Ken Shamrock adopted it, a wrestling version of the ankle lock in WWE as a finishing move. Ken Shamrock was the Brock Lesnar before Brock Lesnar, and the Kurt Angle before Kurt Angle, really, though Kurt Angle was an Olympic gold medalist, not a UFC fighter. But my point being is he was really one of the first legitimate guys to come and cross over from like a legitimate wrestling thing, or well, not really legitimate wrestling because there was always Bob Backlund too, but for fighting at least, legitimate fighting, he was the first guy to really come in to the sport for WWE in that short time, and really excelled. I mean, he was having top-tier feuds with Bret, Rock. He eventually had a feud with Jericho towards the end of his run. But he was having a lot of top-tier feuds. He did eventually win the Intercontinental title after Triple H had to vacate it due to an injury. Won it against X-Pac. He won the 1998 King of the Ring against The Rock, making The Rock tap out. And unfortunately just never got to win the world title. Biggest reasons why Ken Shamrock didn't win the world title was because of the competition that was in the Attitude Era at the time. You had Stone Cold Steve Austin. Just looking at the 1997 roster, you had either current world champions, future world champions, or past world champions on that roster. If you look at it, you got Bret Hart, you got Stone Cold Steve Austin, you got Triple H, you got Shawn Michaels, Mankind, Vader was there, who won the WCW world title, Undertaker, Kane would eventually come in, Rock, obviously. You just had a lot of guys. I think that was like 8 people I just named that were on that roster. So unfortunately, Ken Shamrock kind of just couldn't stick the cracks because there was just so many other guys in there. The best chance for Ken Shamrock to realistically have won the WWE Championship was during the whole Montreal Screwjob thing. Bret Hart has said that Shamrock was one of the guys that he was willing to put over as champion. Stone Cold Steve Austin was his first choice, but obviously Vince didn't want to put the belt on Stone Cold until WrestleMania 14. So his second choice was Ken Shamrock. Ken Shamrock even had a WWE title match against Bret Hart, I believe the Raw before Survivor Series. But unfortunately that ended in a DQ. If they had managed to pull something off, Ken Shamrock most likely would have only been the champion for maybe a month before dropping it to Shawn Michaels, who was the guy who they wanted Austin to feud with at WrestleMania 14 for the title. So even if Shamrock would have won the title at Raw or at Survivor Series, maybe against Bret, which would have prevented the Montreal Screwjob, he most likely would have not had the title that long. He'd probably have only been the champion for a month, but it still would have been better than nothing. Unfortunately, that just never happened, especially with the roster, the stacked roster they had at the time in WWE. But nonetheless, definitely deserves to be on this list. even though he didn't have a long wrestling career. In 1999, he would get injured and would be taken off television before returning to the UFC, and he never came back to the WWE. He would make a run in TNA. As a matter of fact, he would be the first TNA World Heavyweight Champion, but as I noted at the beginning of this video, we do not count TNA. So yeah, he's on this list, and definitely deserved. Was one of my favorite guys to not have won the world title, and I felt he really should have won the world title, but unfortunately, just I guess really the wrong time. With the stacked roster that WWE had at the time, if he had been around in the Ruthless Aggression era, when Brock Lesnar was around and stuff like that, I definitely think he would have won it. And I would have loved to have seen him versus Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle and Shamrock styles were very similar. Obviously, Kurt Angle adapted the ankle lock finishing move once Shamrock was gone. He didn't do it until a couple years later, but still, it would have been a really good feud. A feud with him and Brock Lesnar would have been good. They could have had a World's Most Dangerous Man storyline feud. A lot of potential things. Unfortunately, Shamrock was never allowed back into the WWE after he left, and that was kind of the end of it. So yeah, very sad, but still, nonetheless, Ken Shamrock is the world's most dangerous man. Coming in at number 3 is none other than the Black Heart, the King of Hearts, Owen Hart. Enough is enough, and it's time for a change. Unfortunately, that just did not happen for Owen Hart, and Owen Hart did not win a world title. Owen Hart was a very good wrestler, phenomenal wrestler. He won the King of the Ring. He won the Intercontinental title. He won the European title. He won the Tag Team Champion. But he never got to win the world title. It was the one title that eluded him. His best chance really to have won it was probably at SummerSlam 90. No, it was 94. 94. SummerSlam 94 in the cage was probably his best chance of winning it. But Owen Hart was the face, or not Owen Hart, I'm sorry, Bret Hart, his brother, his real life brother, was the face of the company. And so they wanted Bret to keep the title. Of course, not too long after this, Bret Hart would start a feud with Bob Backlund, where Bob Backlund would win the title from Survivor Series. In the throw in the towel match, Owen Hart aligned himself with Bob Backlund because Owen Hart was a heel at this point and Bret was a babyface, and didn't want his brother to win. After this, Owen Hart really never got another opportunity. There was a possibility after the Montreal Screwjob, when he came back as the Black Heart, to feud with Shawn Michaels, but the reports is that Shawn Michaels refused to wrestle Owen Hart because of the stuff that happened with Bret Hart, and their whole rivalry, which led to the departure of Bret Hart, as we all know. And because of this, Owen Hart ended up feuding with Triple H over the European title, that ultimately culminated at WrestleMania 14. And that was pretty much the end of it. Unfortunately, then after that, Owen Hart kind of was in the mid-card for a while, tag team, etc. And unfortunately, then they put him in the Blue Blazer gimmick. And unfortunately, Owen Hart passed away at Over the Edge in a tragic accident that still, to this day, gives me goosebumps just talking about it, in a bad way, because Owen Hart was one of the greatest wrestlers of all time and never got to, live his full life, and it was not his fault that this happened. And he I was alive for this. I was a kid when this happened, and it was really sad. I remember as a kid watching the Owen Hart Raw show. It was a really that was the first time experiencing the tribute type shows. You had it for Eddie, and then you unfortunately had it for Benoit before we knew he was a murderer. But that was kind of really the first one that I had really seen like that, where they set it up like that, and it was just really sad. And Owen unfortunately passed away way too soon. He was like 34 years old, and just really unfortunate, but also unfortunate that he never got to win the world title. If there's anything, even remotely close to that, which is an understatement because there really isn't anything close to losing your life that way under, being hung the way he was and then falling to the ring to his death, is just really sad. Again, Owen never got to win the belt, and those were really the only opportunities I think he ever had a chance of winning, because again, it was new generation. They had a bunch of other guys coming in. You had the Diesel project, you had the going back to Barrett, and then you had Michaels, and it just never seemed the time was right for Owen to win it. So yeah, number 3 was Owen Hart. So coming in at number 2 is the bad guy, Razor Ramon, aka Scott Hall. Another one, I don't know why. Just unfortunately, once again, bad timing. That's really the only thing I could say about this one. Razor never did win the world title in WWE or WCW, despite the fact that he was a high guy in both companies. He was a high stake guy in both companies. He was always a key player in both companies, but he never got that title. Not even in WCW when they were playing hot potato with that world title a lot of times, which just amazes me that he never won it. Scott Hall came into the WWE doing the Razor Ramon gimmick. He won the Intercontinental title 4 times, had a classic ladder match with Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels and him were both mid-cards at the time. Michaels would eventually, that was a WrestleMania 10 match. Michaels would not win that match, but that title, that would eventually catapult him a couple years later into the main event. Razor continued in the mid-card, but just never seemed to get passed by that. You had Michaels, you had Diesel. Triple H eventually got to where he was, and Razor never got there. It's one of those things where it's like, you look back on it and it was like, how did this guy get in? And it's just, unfortunately, this other guys were getting there. You had Brett, you had Michaels, Yokozuna, obviously the end of Ric Flair. Ric Flair was still there getting the title push when he first started on WWE. He would eventually go to WCW, leaving the Razor Ramon gimmick behind and just coming in as himself. Scott Hall, well, technically, he was trying to come in as Razor Ramon, but not actually calling him Razor Ramon because they were trying to do this invasion angle. WWE guys going to WCW, but in reality, it wasn't, and court deemed that they were not allowed to do that, so they had to admit that they were not under contract with WWE. And so Razor Ramon was starting to call himself Scott Hall since Vince McMahon owned the rights to the Razor Ramon name character. And he would be a part of the Outsiders, which ultimately became the NWO with Hulk Hogan and Kevin Nash, who also jumped with him. Kevin Nash was being Diesel in WWE. And being in the NWO, he was always a mainstay guy. He was always a guy that was always involved in the top tier angles, being in the NWO and stuff like that. But unfortunately, he never got the title when he would come back to the WWE as Scott Hall in the NWO faction shortly after WrestleMania, when he lost to Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 18, he would be fired due to the plane ride of hell. And that would be the it. Unfortunately, Scott Hall just never seemed to be in the right place at the right time and never got to win the world title for WWE or WCW. So, but definitely that's why he's high on this list, because he had everything. Definitely could have been a world champion for sure, and that's why I have him so high on this list. And coming in at number 1 is none other than the bizarre one, Goldust, aka Dustin Rhodes. I mean, what can I say? I mean, the dude's still wrestling at a high level today. Currently in AEW, obviously under his real name, not the Goldust name, because obviously WWE owns the character rights. But I mean, Goldust was just, Dustin Rhodes, he is just amazing wrestler. He's like 51 years old and he's still wrestling at a high level, still can go. Hardly, I don't think, has it gotten really injured that much. And he's still doing it. He won a couple of intercontinental titles in WWE, but it just seemed like he never was able to win the title. I think there was just never really an opportunity for him to win it. Obviously New Generation was around. I think one of the biggest reasons to why he never won the world title was because he was in a controversial gimmick where they probably felt like, that's the best they could probably get out of it with the gimmick. But I personally think Goldust definitely had deserved, with the wrestling he had, the gimmick, the way he really was able to make that gimmick work. He embraced the gimmick despite its, something in today's society. There's no way this gimmick would have passed judgment, being a stereotype, gay type character that he was for its time. Was very over with a lot of people and was a top tier heel. He went in feuds with the Undertaker, and even got a lot of offense on Undertaker, which was very rare during that time period. So it was very, very good gimmick, and still a gimmick that a lot of people like today. And in a society where gimmicks are pulled on just social media backlash alone, it tells you that if you give characters time and people can get behind the gimmick, they can come to respecting the gimmick years later. Now we don't really see that because of the social media era, but nonetheless, I am happy that this character was created, because Goldust was a phenomenal character and he made it work despite a lot of the controversial flaws to it. This is what wrestling is. Wrestling is based on a lot of stereotypes, and a lot of people seem to forget that fact. Goldust made this character work, and he embraced it. Undertaker's not really a dead man, but he still managed to make the character work. And a lot of people, when they get a character, it's like, forget it. They're just gonna just do it just because they're doing it. But Goldust managed to make it work. He managed to make the Goldust character work, and that's all you can ask for. But unfortunately, all the work that he put into the character, unfortunately, did not lead to a world title. There was a possibility, I think they were going to give him the ECW title, but unfortunately ECW was being pulled by the network, so they just kind of dropped that. But I think they were trying to give him it, but it just never happened. That was probably the closest time The closest he had a chance to ever win a world title was in ECW. The brand ECW, not the actual company ECW. But outside of that, I don't really see where there was ever an opportunity for him to win it. But yeah, that is, with that being said, my top 10 guys that unfortunately never won a world championship in WWE and or WCW / ECW, I guess, professional wrestling. Let me know what your guys' list is. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you like the order? Is there someone else that you think should be in this? What do you guys think? Let me know what you guys think. Comment, rate. If you like this video and my other videos, please subscribe. If you are a new subscriber, hit that subscribe button. And if you are already a subscriber, hit that notification bell for all the latest contents. I do have a Discord link in the description. And that's about it, guys. I am the SS Ultimate Goku. I'm out of here. Peace!